There is a misconception we often hold about miracles. We expect them to announce themselves with thunder to split the sky open and fix our problems in an instant. But sometimes a miracle enters your life so quietly that you might actually try to push it away. This is the story of such a miracle. It begins not in a temple, but in a graveyard in Moab. It centers on a woman named Naomi, who has lost everything that defined her: her husband, her children, her home, and perhaps, most painfully, her hope. If we look at Naomi through a modern lens, she is living through the ultimate nightmare of the empty nest, amplified by the crushing weight of grief and poverty. She believes she is finished. She believes the Almighty has emptied her out. But if you have ever felt that God has gone silent, or that your best days are permanently behind you, this story is for you. Because what looked like the end of Naomi's life was actually the moment God began to weave the most important thread of human history. And the fascinating part is that He didn't start with a supernatural sign or a voice from heaven. He started by simply tying two broken people together in the middle of a desert. To truly understand this story, we must first taste the dust of Bethlehem in the days of the Judges. The name Bethlehem literally translates to house of bread, and Ephrathah means fruitful. It was supposed to be the breadbasket of the nation, a place of abundance and divine favor. But when our story opens, the house of bread is empty. The fields are cracked open like dry lips waiting for rain that does not come. This famine wasn't just an economic crisis. For an ancient Israelite, it was a theological crisis. It felt like God had withdrawn His hand, leaving His people in a silence that was deafening. In this context, we meet Elimelech. He isn't a villain. He is a desperate father. Imagine the conversations in that household. Elimelech looks at his wife Naomi and sees the worry etched into her face. He looks at his two young sons, Mahlon and Chilion, names that ironically mean sickly and frail, and he sees their ribs beginning to show. The pressure to provide is a crushing weight. He stands on the hills of Judah and looks across the Dead Sea to the violet mountains of Moab. There he sees rain clouds. There the grain is growing. But moving to Moab wasn't just like moving from Texas to California for a better job. Moab was the ancient enemy. They worshipped Chemosh, a god who demanded terrible sacrifices. To leave the promised land and enter Moab was to walk out of the spiritual covering of God's covenant and step into a spiritual graveyard for the sake of physical survival. It was a choice between faith and food. And Elimelech, driven by the primal instinct to save his family, chose food. He likely told Naomi, "It's just for a season, just until the rains return." So they became refugees. They crossed the Jordan River and settled among people who did not know their God. But what started as a temporary stay turned into a 10-year residency. The spiritual compromise deepened. First, Elimelech died, leaving Naomi a widow in a pagan land. Then her sons, who should have returned home to find wives among their own people, settled down and married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. The family was putting down roots in the wrong soil. They were surviving, yes, but they were slowly losing their identity. Then the final blow struck. The text is brutal in its brevity. Mahlon and Chilion also died. We aren't told how, perhaps a disease, perhaps an accident, but the result was catastrophic. Naomi was now left with 3 gravestones in a land she never wanted to call home. She had left Bethlehem full of family, full of status, full of hope, and now she sat in a house filled with the foreign incense of Moab, completely empty. The security she had sacrificed everything to find had crumbled. She was a woman without a protector in a patriarchal world, a believer who felt abandoned by her God, staring at the wreckage of a safe plan that had gone terribly wrong. The journey begins on the dusty road leading out of Moab. It is a scene of heartbreaking vulnerability. 3 widows standing at a crossroads. Naomi, broken and bitter, stops. She turns to her 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, and pleads with them to go back. This moment is crucial to understanding Naomi's state of mind. She isn't rejecting them because she doesn't love them. She is rejecting them because she loves them too much to drag them into her darkness. Naomi sees herself as a sinking ship. She believes the hand of God is heavy upon her, and she doesn't want these 2 young women to drown in her wake. She offers them a logical exit strategy. Go back to your mother's house. Go back to your gods. Find new husbands. Have babies. Don't waste your youth on an old woman with a dead womb. Orpah listens. She weeps, she kisses Naomi, and she turns back. And we must not judge Orpah. She represents the reasonable choice. She represents common sense. Why walk into a future of poverty and alien status when you can have security at home? Orpah does exactly what any career counselor or financial advisor would tell her to do. She chooses self-preservation, but then the camera focuses on Ruth. Logic dictates that she should follow Orpah. But Ruth does something that defies all reason. She clings. The Hebrew word used here is the same word used for a skin graft or physical adhesion. She physically refuses to let go. Why? What does Ruth see in a bitter, grieving woman who has nothing to offer? This is where the invisible miracle happens. This is the moment of divine intervention. It isn't a lightning bolt. It is a supernatural love known in Hebrew as hesed, a loyal covenant love that stays when it has every reason to leave. God, who seems so silent to Naomi, is actually screaming his love for her through Ruth's stubbornness. Ruth looks at Naomi and essentially says, I know you have nothing. I know you are bitter. I know going with you is social suicide. But I am not going for what you can give me. I am going because I will not let you walk through this valley alone. Ruth makes a vow that rings through history. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. She isn't just converting to a religion. She is binding her destiny to a woman who feels cursed. This is the divine glue. God knows that Naomi cannot survive the journey alone. She would die of a broken heart or exposure. He also knows Ruth cannot find the true God in Moab. So he binds their broken pieces together. It is a symbiotic rescue mission. Naomi needs Ruth's strength to survive the present, and Ruth needs Naomi's path to find her eternal future. The walk from Moab to Bethlehem was long, but the hardest part wasn't the physical journey. It was the arrival. Imagine the scene. The entire town stirs, windows open. People whisper. Is this Naomi? They ask. They remember the wealthy, dignified woman who left with her husband and sons. Now they see a shadow of that woman, dusty, aged, and accompanied only by a foreign girl from a hated nation. The humiliation is palpable. Naomi's response to their whispers is one of the most raw and honest moments in Scripture. She stops them and says, Do not call me Naomi. The name Naomi means pleasant or sweet. She refuses to wear a label that no longer fits her reality. Call me Mara, she declares, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. Listen closely to her theology here. She says, I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. She acknowledges God's sovereignty. She knows He is in control, but she cannot feel His love. She owns her trauma. She doesn't fake a smile for the church crowd. She brings her authentic, shattered self into the light. And God, in His mercy, does not strike her down for her honesty. He allows her to be Mara. But life does not stop for grief. The cupboards are bare. This is where the divine symbiosis truly activates. Naomi is paralyzed by her depression. She sits in the darkness of her old house, unable to move. If left alone, she would starve. But Ruth is there. Ruth, the young Moabite, looks at the empty table and then looks at the barley harvest beginning outside. She doesn't know the land. She doesn't know the dangers, but she has the will to live. Ruth approaches Naomi and asks permission. Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain. Note the dynamic here. Ruth has the strength, but she submits to Naomi's authority. Why? Because Naomi knows the laws of Israel. Naomi knows that God's law in Leviticus commands farmers to leave the corners of their fields for the poor and the widow. Ruth provides the muscle. Naomi provides the map. Ruth provides the labor. Naomi provides the legitimacy. Naomi looks at this young woman, this foreigner, who is willing to endure the backbreaking work and the potential harassment of the reapers just to put bread on the table. For the first time, the bitter woman speaks a word of tenderness. Go, my daughter, she says. It is a small permission, but it is the first step out of the grave. They are now a functioning unit, one paralyzed by the past, one moving toward the future, locked together in a desperate dance of survival that God is about to turn into a dance of redemption. Ruth steps out into the morning sun, a foreigner in a land of closed circles. She has no GPS, no LinkedIn connections, and no idea where she is going. She is simply walking by faith, looking for a field where the reapers might be kind enough or careless enough to let her pick up the leftovers. In the ancient world, a lone foreign woman in a field of working men was incredibly vulnerable. She was walking into a situation ripe for abuse, and here lies the pivot point of the entire story. The Bible says with almost a wink that she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. In Hebrew, this phrasing is deliberate. It highlights the randomness from a human perspective to underscore the precision from a divine perspective. There was no Google Maps guiding her steps. There was no angel whispering, "Turn left." Ruth just walked. But the invisible hand of God, the great choreographer, was gently nudging her steps. She didn't land in the field of a tyrant. She landed in the field of a man named Boaz. Boaz enters the scene not just as a wealthy landowner, but as a man of profound character. He greets his workers with, "The Lord be with you." He notices Ruth immediately. When he finds out who she is, he doesn't see a Moabite intruder. He sees a woman of valor. He approaches her and offers protection, water, and dignity. He tells her, "I have heard what you did for your mother-in-law." Note this. Ruth thought she was invisible, working in the lowest job in society, but her faithfulness had been observed. Boaz pronounces a blessing over her, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done." But the real magic happens when Ruth returns home that evening. She doesn't just come back with a handful of grain. She comes back with an ephah of barley, about 30 pounds. It's a staggering amount for one day's gleaning. Naomi looks at the mountain of food and asks the million-dollar question, "Where did you work today? Whose eyes noticed you?" Ruth drops the name. The man's name is Boaz. Watch Naomi's reaction. For the first time in years, the bitterness cracks. The fog of depression lifts. "Boaz," she whispers, "this isn't just a rich neighbor." Naomi explains to Ruth the concept of the Goel, the kinsman redeemer. In Israel's law, a close relative had the specific right and duty to rescue family members from slavery, poverty, and loss of land. Boaz was one of those men. Suddenly, Naomi realizes that the accident of Ruth's day was not an accident at all. The God she thought had abandoned her in Moab had actually been setting up a divine appointment in a barley field in Bethlehem. The food Ruth brought filled their stomachs. But the name Ruth brought filled Naomi's soul with something she hadn't felt in a decade: hope. If Act 4 was about hope dawning, Act 5 is about the terrifying risk required to seize it. We see a different Naomi now. The woman who wanted to wither away in grief has woken up. The harvest is ending, and she realizes a profound truth: gleaning leftovers might keep them alive as beggars, but it will never restore them as daughters. She isn't looking for a meal ticket. She is fighting to resurrect a family line that history has already crossed out. She wants to move Ruth from the edge of the field to the center of a home, to give the house of Elimelech a future. She hatches a plan so audacious, so risky, that it could ruin everything. She asks Ruth to go to the threshing floor at midnight, a place where men slept, drank, and guarded their grain. For a foreign woman, this was not safe. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, and Ruth could be branded a prostitute or abused. Imagine the atmosphere. Darkness. The smell of crushed grain. The sound of sleeping men. Ruth creeps in, her heart pounding against her ribs. She isn't just uncovering Boaz's feet. She is uncovering her own vulnerability. When Boaz wakes, startled in the dark, Ruth whispers words that change history. "Spread your wings over your servant." Don't miss the emotion here. She is using the same word Boaz used earlier when he said she came under God's wings. She is essentially saying, You told me God would protect me. Now I am asking you to be the hands of God. Will you cover me? She isn't asking for charity. She is proposing marriage to a man far above her station. And Boaz, he doesn't recoil. He is captivated by her virtue. But he reveals a heartbreaking obstacle. There is a redeemer closer than I. Morning comes. The scene shifts from the intimate whispers of the threshing floor to the public tension of the city gate. This is the town square, the supreme court of ancient Bethlehem. Boaz sits down. The elders gather. And Mr. So-and-so, the unnamed closer relative, arrives. This is a high-stakes poker game. Boaz plays his hand masterfully. He offers the land first. The relative's eyes light up. I will redeem it, he says. Of course he will. It's a great business deal, more acreage for his estate. Then Boaz drops the condition that changes everything. But on the day you buy the field, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, to raise up the name of the dead. The air in the room shifts. You can see the relative doing the mental math. To marry Ruth means damaging his own inheritance. It means pouring his money into a child who won't carry his name, but the name of a dead man. It means bringing a cursed Moabite woman into his home. It is a bad investment, so he takes off his sandal. It's a cold legal gesture that screams, "She is too much baggage, I'm out." And in that rejection lies the beauty of redemption. The law looked at Ruth and said, "You are too costly." But Boaz looked at Ruth with all her baggage, her poverty, her foreign past, and said, "You are worth it." He takes the sandal. He pays the full price. He absorbs the cost that the other man refused to pay. At that city gate, Boaz didn't just buy a field. He publicly declared that this broken family was now his family. He chose to lose his own financial security to gain a future for them. The story could have ended at the wedding, and it would have been a lovely romance. But the Bible is not a romance novel. It is a history of redemption. The camera takes us forward one more time. We are back in Naomi's house, but the atmosphere has completely changed. The silence of grief has been replaced by the cry of a newborn baby. Ruth has given birth to a son, Obed. But look who is holding the baby. It isn't Ruth. It is Naomi. The text paints a stunning picture, the grandmother taking the child and laying him in her bosom. The neighbors, the same women who whispered about her bitterness in Act 3, now sing a different tune. They declare, "A son has been born to Naomi." Wait, didn't Ruth give birth? Yes, but legally and spiritually, this child is Naomi's restoration. The divine symbiosis is now complete. Ruth gave her body and her youth to carry this child, but she gave him to Naomi to heal her past. The empty hands that Naomi complained about in chapter 1 are now full of life. The name Mara is gone. She is pleasant once again. But God isn't done yet. He pulls back the curtain to show us why all of this. The famine, the deaths, the tears in Moab, the gleaning in the sun had to happen. The narrator drops a genealogy that hits like a thunderclap. Obed became the father of Jesse, and Jesse became the father of David. Suddenly we realize this isn't just a story about two widows surviving. This is the origin story of Israel's greatest king. That baby in Naomi's arms is the grandfather of King David. The blood of Ruth, the faithful outsider, now flows in the royal line of Israel. And for us looking back through the lens of the New Testament, the picture gets even bigger. If you trace that line down through the centuries past the kings and the exiles, it leads to a stable in Bethlehem. It leads to another baby, another redeemer. Matthew chapter 1 lists the genealogy of Jesus Christ, and right there, shining like a diamond in the dust, is the name Ruth. The message is staggering. God used a famine, a funeral, and a foreigner to pave the way for the Savior of the world. He took the worst chapters of Naomi's life and used them to write the prologue of our salvation. The legacy of their faithfulness didn't just save their family. It produced the king who would save us all. So where do you find yourself in this story today? Maybe you are Elimelech making decisions out of fear, trying to fix a spiritual problem with a financial solution. Maybe you are Ruth walking by faith into a future that looks foggy and frightening. Or maybe, just maybe, you are Naomi. You have looked at your life, at the losses, the setbacks, the empty chairs at your table, and you have whispered the name, Mara. You feel that God has gone silent, or worse, that he has turned against you. If that is you, I want you to hold on to this truth. Naomi could not see chapter 4 while she was crying in chapter 1. She didn't know that the famine was setting the stage for a feast. She didn't know that the loss of her sons would make room for a grandson who would carry the royal line. She thought her life was a tragedy, but God was writing a masterpiece of redemption. Your pain is real, but it is not the final word. Your mistakes in Moab are not too big for God to redeem in Bethlehem. And most importantly, you are not alone. Look around you. Who is the Ruth that God has placed in your life? Who is that stubborn friend, that supportive spouse, or that quiet presence that refuses to leave your side? That person is God's way of hugging you when you feel untouchable. That person is the evidence that the Almighty has not forgotten you. If this story spoke to a broken place in your heart today, I want to invite you to do something simple. In the comments below, I want you to tag your Ruth, the person who stayed when they could have left, and just say, "Thank you for walking with me." Let's fill the comments section with gratitude instead of bitterness. Thank you for watching. If you want to explore more stories of how God meets us in our mess, please subscribe and share this video with someone who needs hope today. Until next time, remember, even in the silence, he is working.